Hello everybody and welcome back for an exciting day. Today we finish up the book of Judges chapter 21. And you'll notice that in our first section we don't have any judges highlighted. We're not featuring any judges in this chapter. And you're like, wait a second, this is the last chapter of Judges, but we haven't even talked about Eli or Samuel. What's up with that? Well, we're going to talk about them in the future. They lived during this period of the Judges, but they're not directly talked about in the book of Judges. There is a book called 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, right? So we'll talk about Eli and Samuel in upcoming books, but they are counted typically as some of they're listed among the judges in most lists, and rightfully so. Today we're actually going to finish up the story that we started in chapter 19. We continued in chapter 20, and then this is the conclusion. It's the terrible story about what the people of Gibeah did to the Levite and his concubine when they spent the night in Gibeah on their way from Bethlehem. As I hope you know by now, if you've been following along in these studies, the period of the Judges is generally placed somewhere between the years 1450 and 1000 BC. The events of chapter 21 fell somewhere within that time period, but we don't know exactly where they fall. We aren't given specific dates in the text. In regards to our map, one thing that we find out in this chapter is that when the Israelite army gathered at Mizpah in the last chapter, they swore an oath. So the city of Mizpah is central to this chapter, just to the northwest of Gibeah. And then the Benjaminites kidnapped wives for themselves at Shiloh. Yeah, don't worry, we'll explain that a little bit more in the outline, but they went to Shiloh and they kidnapped women to make their wives. Our main characters for chapter 21, the elders of Israel, they devised a plan to save the tribe of Benjamin from extinction. And then we need to talk about the people of Benjamin. There were very few people left in the tribe of Benjamin after the war that we talked about in Judges chapter 20. Remember, there were at least 25,100 Benjaminite men killed, and also probably a lot of women. There were so few women, in fact, that the men of Benjamin couldn't find wives. So that's the problem that the Israelites have to solve in this chapter. So now over to our outline section. Verses 1 through 15 make up our first section, and I've entitled it, "The Men of Benjamin Need Wives." So as we mentioned briefly earlier, before the Israelites fought the battle against the Benjaminites in Judges chapter 20, the army gathered in Mizpah, and there we find out they made a pact that they would not give any of their daughters to be a wife for a Benjaminite man. And this was because of the sin of Gibeah and the fact that the men of Benjamin protected those sinful men. After nearly exterminating the tribe of Benjamin in war in Judges 20, they realized that maybe this pact was a mistake because they didn't want an entire tribe of Israel to be wiped out forever. The remaining Benjaminites didn't have enough women to marry, evidently. And so to remedy this problem, the Israelites decided that they were going to kill all of the people in the town of Jabesh-Gilead because they had failed to show up for the meeting at Mizpah. All of the Israelites were gathered to talk about what they needed to do to Gibeah. Apparently, the people of Jabesh-Gilead didn't come, and so when they run into this problem of the men of Benjamin not having wives, they're like, well, we'll just kill all the men in Jabesh-Gilead and take all the virgins from that city and give them to the men of Benjamin. It's just kind of like they make a rash pact here, which ends up having bad consequences, and then they go take out a city to get women for this tribe that they were angry at in the last chapter. It just really kind of, I think, compounds this point that is being made in these chapters, and that is just the confusion of the Israelites and what their purpose is, what they're supposed to be doing. And, they're supposed to be fighting to conquer the land of Canaan from the pagans. And here they are just fighting amongst themselves. It's just a mess, There's no other way to categorize these last couple chapters, but it's just a mess. So the Israelites went, they killed all the men and the married women in Jabesh-Gilead, and they took 400 virgins and they gave them to the Benjaminites. They made peace with them and they said, here's 400 women to deal with your lady shortage. But the 400 virgins weren't enough for the Benjaminite men, so they had to devise a new plan. This takes us to section number 2, verses 16 through 25, kidnapping wives. So the leaders of Israel told the Benjaminites to go to Shiloh. And at Shiloh, there was an annual feast. They told the men of Benjamin to lie in hiding, to lie in wait, until the young women of the village came out for their dancing. Evidently, this dancing was part of the annual feast. When the dancing began, each man was to kidnap for himself a young maiden, and then to carry her back to the tribe of Benjamin, and she would be his wife. And the leaders of Israel promised that they would make amends with the fathers and the brothers of these girls who were kidnapped. And so, why did they come up with this weird plan? Well, it's because of their pact. Using this method, the tribe of Benjamin was preserved, and the Israelites technically kept their vow that they were not going to give their daughters to the Benjaminites to be their wives, because kidnap isn't consent. so it's just, this is so dumb. I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but you look at the situation, like they're going to go kill this whole village, take all of their virgins, and now the leaders of Israel are like, wow, what do we do? We'll come up with this weird plan to kind of sneak around like this loophole in our pact. Just go kidnap some Israelite women and we'll cover you, right? That way we don't have to break our word. But is that even, goodness. The book of Judges ends with this statement, and I think this is kind of what we're supposed to take away. Quote, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And isn't that true? Everyone's just kind of doing their thing. They're not really following God's law. They're just going about life kind of however they want and making dumb, stupid decisions. And so that's the book of Judges. Israel has really shown their true colors, I guess. They've definitely fallen away from the time of Moses, the time of Joshua, where they had strong leadership that was keeping them together. In the book of Judges, they don't have that leadership, and they're clearly not following the laws of God, not becoming the nation that God would want them to be. And then the book kind of ends in this confusion and in this chaos. And so the rest of the story of the Old Testament is going to show us how God guides them further. And it mentioned that we don't have a king here. Eventually, there will be a king, as you may already know. But that'll be a story for another time. But this tells us kind of the spiritual state of the nation, and allows us to progress forward through the story of the Old Testament and through the story of the Bible. So that's where we are, kind of a depressing place to leave off, but that is the book of Judges. And that directly leads us into our final application, and it's very similar to what we were just talking about. What happened to the nation of Israel when everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes? Well, the answer is obvious. The nation was falling apart from the inside. What do you think is going to happen to our nation, to our families, to our communities when everyone just does whatever suits them best? The answer, they're going to fall apart. All of our institutions, all of our communities, our families are going to fall apart. And I think we're seeing that we see that in the example that's set by the lives of many people, and just doing a case study of many people's lives. God's laws and moral guidance protect us against the corrupting power of sin and the ignorance of short-sighted human beings who think they can lead themselves better than God can lead them, than their Creator can lead them, right? So we have to be careful. God is the one who will instruct us in how to live. I know we think oftentimes that we know better, but the story of the Old Testament, the rest of the stories in the Old Testament, the stories of the New Testament, the story of history, all show us that God knows best.